Do you experience symptoms like itchiness, hives, postnasal drip, seasonal allergies, or even the occasional heartburn and loose stools? Maybe feeling like you have these unresolved food sensitivities that you can't quite pinpoint what the foods are and why some days they seem worse than others. You may be experiencing histamine intolerance. And in today's video, I'm going to walk you through the connection between Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism with histamine intolerance, and why, if you have either of those thyroid conditions, why you are at a higher risk of histamine-related symptoms. Now, it's important to note that histamine intolerance is something that is functional to what's happening within the body. It's not something that you should expect to experience forever, but it may be something you experience for a couple of months or a short period of time whenever there's other underlying root causes that you're still working through to facilitate healing. It also can be something that is aggravated when your nervous system is more activated. So if you are in a stressful season, or if you're noticing there's more nervous system dysregulation happening, you're having difficulty sleeping and winding down, this could also be another trigger for these histamine symptoms. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through why there's a link between hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, and histamine intolerance, and some steps you can take to help support your histamine levels to ultimately help reduce your histamine intolerance symptoms. Histamine intolerance is one of the most common symptoms that we see in clients that we work with. Oftentimes, individuals are experiencing this for a couple of different factors. The first thing that we know is that when there is hypothyroidism or low thyroid function present, it actually decreases the production of the enzyme DAO that breaks down histamine. So we're going to see a reduced ability to actually break down and get rid of these histamines when we're exposed to them through food or the environment. There can also be genetic factors involved here. DAO is something that is driven through genetics, so you may also have lower DAO activity if potentially you've inherited low DAO activity from your parents. Now, DAO is something that can be supplemented, and oftentimes we find that it can help with more acute exposures. If, for example, you're going into an environment where you know you typically get histamine symptoms, or you're eating something that typically causes a histamine reaction, this can be something that you utilize before those exposures to potentially help with that metabolism of those histamines. The second is if there is Hashimoto's present and there's an autoimmune component to the hypothyroidism, this also can be what's driving the histamine intolerance. And that's because when there's autoimmunity present, the immune system is overreactive. It's releasing histamines kind of as like this alert that there's inflammation happening within the immune system. You add to that many individuals that have Hashimoto's also have what we call a leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability. We know that that can be one of 3 triggers that actually triggers the Hashimoto's to begin with. And a leaky gut can also increase the risk of histamine intolerance. Then we also can see dysbiosis very commonly with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's because the thyroid very much regulates the speed of food moving through our gut. And so there's an increased risk of bacterial overgrowth happening that can lead to things like dysbiosis and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, as many people refer to it as. Low thyroid function also impacts our stomach acid and bile acid production, and these are key digestive juices that help us be able to break down and move food through our digestive system. So if we have low thyroid function, there can be some compromised function within the digestive system that can actually increase the production of histamine-producing bacteria. And that means that there's actual bacteria that live in our gut. They're making histamines, and that increases the overall load of histamines in the body. So then when you eat or are exposed to histamines in the environment, your overall load of histamines is higher than what your body can break down. It's very common for individuals that have a history of autoimmunity to also have a history of chronic viral infections. Chronic viral infections include things like Epstein-Barr virus, mononucleosis or mono, as well as things like streptococcal, cytomegalovirus or CMV, herpes simplex virus. These are common viral infections that we may have been exposed to when we were a child and now are living dormant in the body. However, what happens is that when there is a high load of these viral infections, the immune system is overburdened, and this diverts a lot of resources towards handling the high levels of these viruses. Now, oftentimes conventionally, many doctors won't really recognize elevated levels of IgG antibodies to any viruses because in their mind, it's just telling us that there's been a past infection. And that's correct. We do expect that if you've had any of these viruses in the past, we would expect to see elevated IgG levels. However, in the case of autoimmunity, where it becomes important is that if there are several viruses that are in very high levels of IgG, that's telling us that the immune system is overburdened and the immune system is struggling to get a hold of that virus. In this type of situation, it actually pushes the immune system into more of a Th1, Th2 dominance, and this can actually drive more of these histamine intolerant symptoms. Essentially, the immune system is in a very reactive state and it's in overdrive, and so it feels like there's many threats that are constantly being thrown at it. And remember that the mast cells releasing histamine is just a response to an aggravated immune system. So one of the things that we commonly work at in our practice is if we see that someone has a very high viral load, we're going to work at utilizing specific targeted strategies to be able to improve their immune system's tolerance, to give the immune system more fuel to fight these different infections, and also helping to be able to modulate the immune system to help the immune system actually decrease the level of these IgG antibodies. One of the formulas that we commonly use to be able to help with this is called Micro-Immunotherapy, and this is a common practice that is utilized in Europe, not as commonly used in the United States, like where we're located, but is something that has had a profound impact on our patients' outcomes and being able to actually help their immune system get a hold of these viruses that are actually part of the root cause of what triggered the Hashimoto's in the first place. So what we find is that as we are able to improve the immune system's tolerance and bring down this aggravated state from the immune system, we're able to stop mast cells, which are a part of the immune system, from releasing so much histamine, and in turn that reduces a lot of these histamine-related symptoms. We're oftentimes going to be working alongside, also working at some of the other factors, such as improving mineral levels that help make sure we have more thyroid hormones to make more of a DAO, potentially also looking at supplementing with DAO before acute exposures, as well as improving the gut microbiome, so strengthening that gut barrier so that the gut isn't as leaky, and improving that dysbiosis, so reshaping the microbiome to decrease some of the overgrowth of that bad bacteria and re-inoculating it with those good microbes that are going to help support our gut immune system and help protect us from more of these histamine producing bacteria in the future. And we can do all of this through specific types of dietary strategies, specific types of nutrients and herbs that we're using clinically for acute treatment time periods to be able to make these changes as we're working on stabilizing the mast cells and ensuring that we have those histamine symptoms under control. Histamine symptoms can really affect every body system, and that's where it can be a bit confusing because oftentimes when people think of histamine, they think of seasonal allergies, but histamine intolerance can really affect everything. It can even cause irregular menstrual cycles. It can be the cause of loose stools and heartburn. It can cause a lot of an uptick in symptoms around ovulation or right before your menstrual cycle. And that's because if you are a menstruating woman, that during these time periods, there's an uptick in estrogen. And then before your period, there's also added to that a decrease in progesterone. And estrogen actually stimulates our mast cells to release more histamine, whereas progesterone actually helps stabilize our mast cells to calm down the histamine release. So during these hormonal shifts, we can see an uptick in symptoms occur. So for some individuals, it's looking like utilizing some of these histamine support strategies in the acute time period around those times of your cycle to be able to help prevent some of these symptoms. And for others, it might be having to utilize some of these strategies ongoing while we're working on addressing the root causes like the gut microbiome issues, as well as the chronic viral load. Those things can take several months for us to correct. So a lot of times we're having to make modifications to improving the histamine intolerant symptoms for a couple of months before we're really going to see the root causes addressed to where we're no longer going to need the histamine support tools. A low histamine diet is a common approach that many people will take to help reduce histamine symptoms. That can be something valuable during this time period, but everyone's really different on if they need a low histamine diet. For some people, it doesn't really move a needle and make much of a difference. There's also certain foods that can be higher in histamine than others and can be more problematic. For example, foods that are fermented such as kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, we find that those can be more problematic, or foods like wine, or I guess not a food, or alcoholic beverages like wine or beer can be more problematic than things like tomatoes and avocados that do have a higher histamine load, but for some individuals don't tend to cause as many issues. There's other strategies we can use, such as foods rich in quercetin. Quercetin is another mast cell stabilizer. One of my favorite sources of quercetin is stinging nettle infusions because they're a great way to also provide additional minerals that are needed for low thyroid function, and it provides some support to the adrenal glands to help calm down that nervous system activation that's driving the histamine flares. If you want to learn a little bit more about some of the key ways that you can support histamine response, be sure to follow me over on Instagram at functional.fueling, as I answer a lot of questions about this every Friday in my weekly Friday question box. If you're ready to take charge of your thyroid health and start improving your thyroid with a clear functional nutrition plan, you'll want to check out our program, Functional Thyroid Foundations. It's a 4-week live program that teaches you how to regain energy, reduce inflammation, and have a clear plan path forward of how to improve your thyroid function utilizing the power of functional nutrition. You can learn more about it with the link below, and be sure to hit the bell to subscribe so you'll be the first to know when I release a new video.